Aitreya-Aranyaka Upanishad. Second Aranyaka, first, second, and third Adhyayas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jyoti Taravanat. First Adhyaya, first Kanda. This is the path, this sacrifice, and this Brahman. This is the true. Let no man swerve from it. Let no man transgress it. For the old sages did not transgress it, and those who did transgress became lost. This has been declared by a rishi. 3 classes of people transgressed. Others settled down round about the venerable Agni fire. The great sun stood in the midst of the worlds. The blowing Vayu air entered the Harats, the dawns or the ends of the earth. When he says 3 classes of people transgressed, the 3 classes of people who transgressed are what we see here on earth, born again, as birds, trees, herbs, and serpents. When he says, others settle down round about the venerable, he means those who now sit down to worship Agni, fire. When he says, the great stood in the midst of the worlds, the great one in the midst of the world is meant for this Aditya, the sun. When he says, the blowing entered the Harits, he means that Vayu, the air, the purifier, entered all the corners of the earth. Second Kanda. People say Ukta, Ukta, hymns, hymns, without knowing what Ukta, hymn, means. The hymn is truly to be considered as the earth, for from it all whatsoever exists arises. The object of its praise is Agni, and the 80 verses of the hymn are food, for by means of food one obtains everything. The hymn is truly the sky, for the birds fly along the sky and men drive following the sky. The object of its praise is Vayu, air, and the 80 verses of the hymn are food, for by means of food one obtains everything. The hymn is truly the heaven, for from its gift rain all whatsoever exists arises. The object of its praise is Aditya, the sun, and the 80 verses are food, for by means of food one obtains everything. So much with reference to the gods, mythological. Now with reference to man, physiological. The hymn is truly man. He is great. He is Prajapati. Let him think, I am the hymn. The hymn is his mouth, as before in the case of the earth. The object of its praise is speech, and the 80 verses of the hymn are food, for by means of food he obtains everything. The hymn is the nostrils, as before in the case of the sky. The object of its praise is breath, and the 80 verses of the hymn are food, for by means of food he obtains everything. The slight bent at the root of the nose is, as it were, the place of the brilliant Aditya, the sun. The hymn is the forehead, as before in the case of heaven. The object of its praise is the eye, and the 80 verses of the hymn are food, for by means of food he obtains everything. The 80 verses of the hymn are alike food with reference to the gods as well as with reference to man, for all these beings breathe and live by means of food indeed. By food given in alms, etc., he conquers this world. By food given in sacrifice, he conquers the other. Therefore, The 80 verses of the hymn are alike food with reference to the gods as well as with reference to man. All this that is food, and all this that consumes food, is only the earth. For from the earth arises all whatever there is, and all that goes hence dies on earth. Heaven consumes it all, and all that goes thence returns from heaven to a new life. The earth consumes it all. That earth is thus both food and consumer. He also, the true worshipper, who meditates on himself as being the Ukta, is both consumer and consumed, subject and object. No one possesses that which he does not eat, or the things which do not eat him. Third Kanda. Next follows the origin of seed. The seed of Prajapati are the Devas, gods. The seed of the Devas is rain. The seed of rain are herbs. The seed of herbs is food. The seed of food is seed. The seed of seed are creatures. The seed of creatures is the heart. The seed of the heart is the mind. The seed of the mind is speech, Veda. The seed of speech is action, sacrifice. The action done in a former state is this man, the abode of Brahman. He, man, consists of food, Ira, and because he consists of food, Iramaya, he consists of gold, Hiranmaya. He who knows this becomes golden in the other world, and is seen as golden as the sun for the benefit of all beings. Fourth Kanda. Brahman in the shape of prana, breath, entered into that man by the tips of his feet, and because Brahman entered prapadyata into that man by the tips of his feet, therefore people call them the tips of the feet, prapada, but hooves and claws in other animals. Then Brahman crept up higher, and therefore they were called the thighs, Uru. Then he said, grasp wide, and that was called the belly, Udara. Then he said, make room for me, and that was called the chest, Uras. The Sarkarakshas meditate on the belly as Brahman, the Arunis on the heart. Both these places are Brahman indeed. But Brahman crept upwards and came to the head. And because he came to the head, therefore the head is called head. Then these delights are lighted in the head: sight, hearing, mind, speech, breath. Delights alight on him who thus knows why the head is called head. These 5 delights or senses strove together, saying, I am the Ukta, him, I am the Ukta. Well, they said, let us all go out from this body. Then on whose departure this body shall fall, he shall be the Ukta among us. Speech went out, yet the body without speaking remained, eating and drinking. Sight went out, yet the body without seeing remained, eating and drinking. Hearing went out, yet the body without hearing remained, eating and drinking. Mind went out, yet the body, as if blinking, remained, eating and drinking. Breath went out. Then when breath was gone out, the body fell. It was decayed and because people said it decayed, therefore it was called body, sarira. That is the reason of its name. If a man knows this, then the evil enemy who hates him decays, or the evil enemy who hates him is defeated. They strove again, saying, I am the Ukta, I am the Ukta. Well, they said, let us enter that body again. Then on whose entrance this body shall rise again, he shall be the Ukta among us. Speech entered, but the body lay still. Sight entered, but the body lay still. Hearing entered, but the body lay still. Mind entered, but the body lay still. Breath entered, and when breath had entered, the body rose, and it became the Ukta. Therefore, breath alone is the Ukta. Let people know that breath is the Ukta indeed. The Devas, the other senses, said to breath, Thou art the Ukta, thou art all this, we are thine, thou art ours. This has also been said by a Rishi, Thou art ours, we are thine. Fifth Kanda. Then the Devas carried him, the breath, forth, and being carried forth, he was stretched out. And when people said he was stretched out, then it was in the morning. When they said he is gone to rest, then it was in the evening. Day, therefore, is the breathing up, night the breathing down. Speech is Agni, sight that Aditya sun, mind the moon, hearing the dis quarters. This is the Prahitam Sam Yoga, the union of the deities as sent forth. These deities, Agni, etc., are thus in the body, but their phenomenal appearance yonder is among the deities. This was intended. And Hiranyadat Vaidya also, who knew this, and who by his knowledge had become Hiranyagarbha, or the universal spirit, said, Whatever they do not give to me, they do not possess themselves. I know the Prahitam Sam Yoga, the union of the deities as entered into the body. This is it. To him who knows this, all creatures, without being constrained, offer gifts. That breath is to be called Satya, the true, for Sat is breath, Thi is food, Yam is the sun. This is threefold, and threefold the eye also may be called, it being white, dark, and the pupil. He who knows why true is true, why Satya is Satya, even if he should speak falsely, yet what he says is true. Sixth Kanda. Speech is his, the breath's rope, the names, the knots. Thus by his speech as by a rope, and by his names as by knots, all this is bound. For all this are names indeed, and with speech he calls everything. People carry him who knows this as if they were bound by a rope. Of the body of the breath thus meditated on, the Ushni verse forms the hairs, the Gayatri the skin, the Tristubh the flesh, the Anushtubh the muscles, the Gagati the bone, the Panki the marrow, the Brihati the breath, prana. He is covered with the verses, khandas, meters, because he is thus covered with verses. Therefore they call him khandas, coverings, meters. If a man knows the reason why khandas are called khandas, the verses cover him in whatever place he likes against any evil deed. This is said by a rishi: I saw the breath as a guardian, never tiring, coming and going on his ways, the arteries. That breath in the body, being identified with the sun among the Devas, illuminating the principal and intermediate quarters of the sky, is returning constantly in the midst of the worlds. He says, I saw a guardian because he, the breath, is a guardian, for he guards everything. He says, never tiring, because the breath never rests. He says, coming and going on his ways, because the breath comes and goes on his ways. He says, illuminating the principal and intermediate, because he illuminates these only, the principal and intermediate quarters of the sky. He says, he is returning constantly in the midst of the worlds, because he returns indeed constantly in the midst of the worlds. And then there is another verse: they are covered like caves by those who make them. For all this is covered indeed by breath. This ether is supported by breath as Brihati, and as this ether is supported by breath as Brihati, so one should know that all things, not excepting ants, are supported by breath as Brihati. Seventh Khanda. Next follow the powers of that person. By his speech earth and fire were created, herbs are produced on the earth, and Agni, fire, makes them ripe and sweet. Take this, thus saying, do earth and fire serve their parent, speech. As far as the earth reaches, as far as fire reaches, so far does his world extend, and as long as the world of the earth and fire does not decay, so long does his world not decay, who thus knows this power of speech. By breath in the nose, the sky and the air were created. People follow the sky, and hear along the sky, while the air carries along pure scent. Thus do sky and air serve their parent, the breath. As far as the sky reaches, as far as the air reaches, so far does his world extend, and as long as the world of the sky and the air does not decay, so long does his world not decay, who thus knows this power of breath. By his eye heaven and the sun were created. Heaven gives him rain and food, while the sun causes his light to shine. Thus do the heaven and the sun serve their parent, the eye. As far as heaven reaches, and as far as the sun reaches, so far does his world extend, and as long as the world of heaven and the sun does not decay, so long does his world not decay, who thus knows the power of the eye. By his ear the quarters and the moon were created. From all the quarters they come to him, and from all the quarters he hears. While the moon produces for him the bright and the dark halves for the sake of sacrificial work. Thus do the quarters and the moon serve their parent, the ear. As far as the quarters reach, and as far as the moon reaches, so far does his world extend. And as long as the world of the quarters and the moon does not decay, so long does his world not decay, who thus knows the power of the ear. By his mind and water the Varuna were created. Water yields to him faith, being used for sacred acts. Varuna keeps his offspring within the law. Thus do water and Varuna serve their parent, the mind. As far as water reaches, and as far as Varuna reaches, so far does his world extend. And as long as the world of water and Varuna does not decay, so long does his world not decay, who thus knows the power of the mind. 8th Kanda. Was it water really? Was it water? Yes, all this was water indeed. This water was the root cause, that the world was the shoot effect. He, the person, is the father, they, earth, fire, etc., or the suns. Whatever there is belonging to the sun belongs to the father. Whatever there is belonging to the father belongs to the sun. This was intended. Mahidasa Aitreya, who knew this, said, I know myself reaching as far as the gods, and I know the gods reaching as far as me. For these gods receive their gifts from hence, and are supported from hence. This is the mountain, namely, eye, ear, mind, speech, and breath. They call it the mountain of Brahman. He who knows this throws down the evil enemy who hates him. The evil enemy who hates him is defeated. He, the prana identified with Brahman, is the life, the breath. He is being while the Jivatman remains, and not being when the Jivatman departs. The Devas, speech, etc., worshipped him, prana, as buddhi or being, and thus they became great beings. And therefore even now a man who sleeps breathes like Burubho. The Asuras worshipped him as Abhuti, or not being, and thus they were defeated. He who knows this becomes great by himself, while the evil enemy who hates him is defeated. He, the breath, is death when he departs, and immortality while he abides. And this has been said by a rishi. Downwards and upwards he, the wind of the breath, goes, held by food. For this up-breathing, being held back by the down-breathing, does not move forward and leave the body altogether. The immortal dwells in the mortal, for through him, the breath, all this dwells together, the bodies being clearly mortal, but this being, the breath, being immortal. These two, body and breath, go forever in different directions, the breath moving the senses of the body supporting the senses of the breath, the former going upwards to another world, the body dying and remaining on earth. They increase the one, the body, but they do not increase the other. That is, they increase these bodies by food, but this being, breath, is immortal. He who knows this becomes immortal in that world, having become united with Hiranyagarbha, and is seen as immortal in the sun by all beings. Yeah, by all beings. 2nd Adhyaya, 1st Kanda. He, the sun who shines, honored this world, the body of the worshipper by entering into it, in the form of a man, the worshipper who meditates on breath. For he who shines, the sun, is the same as the breath. He honored this body of the worshipper during 100 years. Therefore, there are 100 years in the life of a man. Because he honored him during 100 years, therefore, there are the poets of the first mandala of the Rig Veda, called the Satarkin, having honor for 100 years. Therefore, people call him who is really prana breath, the Satarkin poets. He, breath, placed himself in the midst of all whatsoever exists. Because he placed himself in the midst of all whatsoever exists, therefore there are the poets of the second to the 9th mandala of the Rig Veda called the Madhyamas. Therefore people call him who is really prana breath, the Madhyama poets. He as up-breathing is the swallower, Gritsa; as down-breathing he is delight, Mother. Because as up-breathing is swallower, Gritsa, and as down-breathing delight, Mother, therefore there is the poet of the second mandala of the Rig Veda called Gritsa Mother. Therefore people call him who is really prana breath, Gritsa Mother. Of him, breath, all this whatsoever was a friend. Because of him all Viswam, this whatsoever was a friend, Mitram. Therefore there is the poet of the third mandala of the Rig Veda called Viswamitra. Therefore people call him who is really prana breath, Viswamitra. The Devas, speech, etc., said to him, the breath, he is to be loved by all of us. Because the Devas said to him that he was to be loved, Vama, by all of them, therefore there is the poet of the fourth mandala of the Rig Veda called Vamadeva. Therefore people call him who is really prana breath, Vamadeva. He, breath, guarded all this whatsoever from evil. Because he guarded Atrayata all this whatsoever from evil, therefore there are the poets of the fifth mandala of the Rig Veda called Atraya. Therefore people call him who is really prana breath, Atraya. Second Kanda. He, breath, is likewise a Bibradvaja, bringer of offspring. Offspring is Vaja, and he, breath, supports offspring. Because he supports it, therefore there is the poet of the sixth mandala of the Rig Veda called Bharadvaja. Therefore people call him who is really prana breath, Bharadvaja. The Devas, speech, etc., said to him, he it is who chiefly causes us to dwell on earth. Because the Devas said of him that he chiefly caused them to dwell on earth, therefore there is the poet of the seventh mandala of the Rig Veda called Vashishta. Therefore people call him who is really prana breath, Vasishta. He, breath, went forth towards all this whatsoever. Because he went forth toward all this whatsoever, therefore there are the poets of the eighth mandala of the Rig Veda called the Pragathas. Therefore people call him who is really prana breath, the Pragathas. He, breath, purified all this whatsoever. Because he purified all this whatsoever, therefore there are the hymns and also the poets of the ninth mandala of the Rig Veda called the Pavamanis. Therefore people call him who is really prana breath, the Pavamanis. He, breath, said, let me be everything whatsoever, small, Shudra, and great, Mahat. And this became the Shudra Suktas and Maha Suktas. Therefore There were the hymns and also the poets of the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda called the Shudra Suktas and Maha Suktas. Therefore, people call him who is really prana the Shudra Suktas and Maha Suktas. He, breath, said once, "You have said what is well said, Su-ukta indeed." This became a Sukta, hymn. Therefore, there are the Sukta. Therefore, people call him who is really prana, breath, Sukta. He, breath, is a Rik verse, for he did honor to all beings by entering into them. Because he did honor to all beings, therefore there was the Rik verse. Therefore people call him who is really prana, breath, Rik. He, breath, is an Ardharka, half verse, for he did honor to all places, Ardha. Because he did honor to all places, therefore there was the Ardharka. Therefore people call him who is really prana, breath, Ardharka. He, breath, is a Pada, word, for he got into all these beings. Because he got Padi into all these beings, therefore there was the Pada, word. Therefore people call him who is really prana, breath, Pada. He, breath, is an Akshara, syllable, for he pours out Sharati gifts to all these beings, and without him no one can pour out Atikshararti gifts. Therefore there was the Akshara, syllable. Therefore people call him who is really prana, breath, Akshara. Thus all these Rik verses, all Vedas, all sounds are one word, namely prana, breath. Let him know that prana is all Rik verses. Third Kanda. While Viswamitra was going to repeat the hymns of this day, the Mahavrata, Indra sat down near him. Viswamitra, guessing that Indra wanted food, said to him, "This, the verses of the hymn, is food," and repeated the 1000 Brihati verses. By means of this he went to the delightful home of Indra, Swarga. Indra said to him, "Rishi, thou hast come to my delightful home." Rishi, repeat a second hymn. Viswamitra, guessing that Indra wanted food, said to him, "This, the verses of the hymn, is food," and repeated the 1000 Brihati verses. By means of this he went to the delightful home of Indra, Swarga. Indra said to him, "Rishi, thou hast come to my delightful home." Rishi, repeat a third hymn. Vishwamitra, guessing that Indra wanted food, said to him, "This, the verses of the hymn, is food," and repeated the third Brihati verses. By means of this he went to the delightful home of Indra, Swarga. Indra said to him, "Rishi, thou hast come to my delightful home. I grant thee a boon." Vishwamitra said, "May I know thee?" Indra said, "I am Prana." "O Rishi, thou art Prana. All things are Prana. For it is Prana who shines as the sun, and I here pervade all regions under that form. This food of mine, the hymn, is my friend and my support, Dakshina. This is the food prepared by Viswamitra. I am verily he who shines the sun. Fourth Kanda. This then becomes perfect as 1000 of Brihati verses. Its consonants form its body, its voice, vowels, the soul, its sibilants, the air of the breath. He who knows this became Vishvata. he took this name from thence. Indra verily declared this to Vishwamitra, and Indra verily declared this to Bharadwaja. Therefore Indra is invoked by him as a friend. This becomes perfect as 1,000 of Brihati verses, and of that hymn perfect with 1,000 Brihati verses there are 36,000 syllables. So many are also the thousands of days of 100 years, 36,000. With the consonants they fill the nights, with the vowels the day. This becomes perfect as 1,000 of Brihati verses. He who knows this, after this 1,000 of Brihatis thus accomplished, becomes full of knowledge, full of the gods, full of Brahman, full of the immortal, and then goes also to the gods. What I am, the worshipper, that is he, Sun. What he is, that am I. This has been said by a Rishi. The Sun is the self of all that moves and rests. Let him look to that. Let him look to that. Third Adhyaya, First Kanda. He who knows himself as the fivefold him, Ukta, the emblem of prana, breath, from whence all this springs, he is clever. These five are the earth, air, ether, water and fire, Jyotis. This is the self, the fivefold Ukta. For from him all this springs, and into him it enters again at the dissolution of the world. He who knows this becomes the refuge of his friends. And to him who knows the food object and the feeder subject in that Ukta, a strong sun is born, and food is never wanting. Water and earth are food, for all food consists of these two. Fire and air are the feeder, for by means of them man eats all food. Ether is the bowl, for all this is poured into the ether. He who knows this becomes the bowl or support of his friends. To him who knows the food and the feeder in that Ukta, a strong sun is born, and food is never wanting. Herbs and trees are food, animals the feeder, for animals eat herbs and trees. Of them again, those who have teeth above and below, shaped after the likeness of man, are feeders. The other animals are food. Therefore, these overcome the other animals, for the eater is over the food. He who knows this is over his friends. Second Kanda. He who knows the gradual development of the self in him, the man conceived as the Ukta, obtains himself more development. There are herbs and trees and all that is animated, and he knows the self gradually developing in them. For in herbs and trees sap only is seen, but thought, Chitta, in animated beings. Among animated beings again the self develops gradually, for in some sap blood is seen as well as thought, but in others thought is not seen. And in man again the self develops gradually, for he is most endowed with knowledge. He says what he has known, he sees what he has known, he knows what is to happen tomorrow, he knows heaven and hell. By means of the mortal he desires the immortal. Thus is he endowed. With regard to the other animals, hunger and thirst only are a kind of understanding. But they do not say what they have known, nor do they see what they have known. They do not know what is to happen tomorrow, nor heaven and hell. They go so far and no further, for they are born according to their knowledge in a former life. Third Kanda. That man, conceived as Ukta, is the sea, rising beyond the whole world. Whatever he reaches, he wishes to go beyond. If he reaches the sky, he wishes to go beyond. If he should reach that heavenly world, he would wish to go beyond. That man is fivefold. The heat in him is fire. The apertures of the senses or ether, blood, mucus, and seed or water. The body is earth. Breath is air. That air is fivefold, namely, up breathing, down breathing, back breathing, out breathing, on breathing. The other powers, devatas, namely, sight, hearing, mind, and speech, are comprised under up breathing and down breathing. For when breath departs, they also depart with it. That man, conceived as Ukta, is the sacrifice, which is a succession now of speech and now of thought. That sacrifice is fivefold, namely, the Agnihotra, the new and full moon sacrifices, the 4 monthly sacrifices, the animal sacrifice, the Soma sacrifice. The Soma sacrifice is the most perfect of sacrifices, for in it these 5 kinds of ceremonies are seen. The first, which precedes the libations, the Diksha, etc., then 3 libations, and what follows, the Avabrita, etc., is the 5th. Fourth Kanda. He who knows one sacrifice above another, one day above another, one deity above the others, he is clever. Now this great Ukta, the Nishkevalya Sastra, is the sacrifice above another, the day above another, the deity above others. This Ukta is fivefold. With regard to its being performed as a stoma chorus, it is Trivrith, Pankadasa, Saptadasa, Ekavimsa, and Pankavimsa. With regard to its being performed as a Saman song, it is Gayatra, Ratantara, Brihat, Bhadra, and Rajana. With regard to meter, it is Gayatri, Ushni, Brihati, Tristub, and Davipada. And the explanation given before in the Aryanka is that it is the head, the right wing, the left wing, the tail, and the body of the bird. He performs the Prastava in 5 ways. He performs the Udgita in 5 ways. He performs the Pratihara in 5 ways. He performs the Ubhadrava in 5 ways. He performs the Nidhana in 5 ways. All this together forms 1000 stobas or musical syllables. Thus also are the Rik verses contained in the Nishkevalya, recited by the Hotri in 5 orders. What precedes the 80 Trikas? That is 1 order. Then follow the 3 sets of 80 Trikas each, and what comes after is the 5th order. This, the hymns of this Sastra as a whole, if properly counted with the Stoba syllables, comes to 1000 of Brihati verses. That 1000 is the whole, and 10 is called the whole. For number is such, measured by 10. 10 tens or 100, 10 hundreds or 1000, and that is the whole. These are the 3 meters, the tens pervading everything. And this food also, the 3 sets of hymns being represented as food, is threefold: eating, drinking, and chewing. He obtains that food by those 3 numbers, 10, 100, and 1000, or by the 3 sets of 80 trikas. 5th Kanda. This Nishkevalya Sastra becomes perfect as 1,000 of Brihati verses. Some teachers belonging to a different Saka recognize 1,000 of different meters, not of Brihatis only. They say, is another 1,000 of other verses good? Let us say it is good. Some say 1,000 of Trishtubh verses, others 1,000 of Gakati verses, others 1,000 of Anushtubh verses. This has been said by a Rishi. Poets, through their understanding, discovered Indra dancing an Anushtubh. This is meant to say, they discovered and meditated in speech called Anushtubh at that time when they worshipped the Ukta, the prana, breath, connected with Indra. He who takes the recited verses as Anushtubhs is able to become celebrated and of good report. No, he says, rather this is such a man liable to die before his time. For that self consisting of Anushtubhs is incomplete. For if a man confines himself to speech, not to breath, then driven by his mind, he does not succeed with speech. Let him work towards the Brihati, for the Brihati, breath, is the complete self. That self, Jivatman, is surrounded on all sides by members. And as that self is on all sides surrounded by members, the Brihati also is on all sides surrounded by meters. For the self in the heart is the middle of these members, and the Brihati is the middle of the meters. He is able to become celebrated and of good report, but the other able to die before his time. Thus he said, for the Brihati is the complete self. Therefore, let him work towards the Brihati. Let him reckon the Shastra recitation as 1,000 Brihatis. 6th Kanda. This Nishkevalya Shastra becomes perfect as 1,000 of Brihati verses. In this 1,000 of Brihatis, there are 1,125 Anushtubhs, for the smaller is contained in the larger. This has been said by a Rishi. A speech of 8 feet, because there are 8 feet of 4 syllables each in the Anushtubh, of 9 corners, because the Brihati becomes 9-cornered, having 9 feet of 4 syllables each. Touching the truth, because speech, Anushtubh, is truth, touched by the verse Brihati. He, the Hotri, makes the body out of Indra. For out of this 1,000 of Brihati verses turned into Anushtubhs, and therefore out of prana as connected with Indra, and out of Brihati, which is prana, he makes speech. That is Anushtubh as a body. This Mahadukta is the highest development of speech, and it is 5-fold, namely measured, not measured, music, true and untrue. A Rik verse, a Gatha, a Kumbhya or measured metrical, a Yajus line, an invocation, and general remarks, these are not measured, they are in prose. A sermon or any portion, parvan of it, is music. Om is true, Na is untrue. What is true Om is the flower and fruit of speech. He is able to become celebrated and of good report, for he speaks of the true Om, the flower and fruit of speech. Now the untrue is the root of speech, and as a tree whose root is exposed dries up and perishes, thus a man who says what is untrue exposes his root, dries up and perishes. Therefore one should not say what is untrue, but guard oneself from it. That syllable, Om, yes, goes forward to the first cause of the world and is empty. Therefore, if a man says Om, yes, to everything, then that which he gives away is wanting to him here. If he says Om, yes, to everything, then he would empty himself and would not be capable of any enjoyments. That syllable Na, no, is full for oneself. If a man says no to everything, then his reputation would become evil, and that would ruin him even here. Therefore, let a man give at the proper time only, not at the wrong time. Thus he unites the true and the untrue, and from the union of those two he grows and becomes greater and greater. He who knows the speech of which this, the Mahadukta, is a development, he is clever. A is the whole of speech, and manifested through different kinds of contact, mutes, and of wind, sibilants. It becomes manifold and different. Speech, if uttered in a whisper, is breath. If spoken aloud, it is body. Therefore, if whispered, it is almost hidden. For what is incorporeal is almost hidden, and breath is incorporeal. But if spoken aloud, it is body, and therefore it is perceptible, for body is perceptible. Seventh Kanda. This Nikshavalya Sastra becomes perfect as 1,000 of Brihatis. It is glory, the glorious Brahman, not the absolute Brahman. It is Indra. Indra is the Lord of all beings. He who thus knows Indra as the Lord of all beings departs from this world by loosening the bonds of life. So said Mahidasa Aitreya. Having departed, he becomes Indra or Hiranyagarbha and shines in those worlds. And with regard to this, they say, if a man obtains the other world in this form by meditating on the prana, breath, which is the Ukta, the hymn of the Mahavrata, then in what form does he obtain this world? Here the blood of the woman is a form of Agni, fire. Therefore no one should despise it. And the seed of the man is a form of Aditya, sun. Therefore no one should despise it. This self, the woman, gives herself, skin, blood, and flesh, to that self, fat, bone, and marrow. And that self, man, gives his self, fat, bone, and marrow, to this self, skin, blood, and flesh. Thus these two grow together. In this form, belonging to the woman and to fire, he goes to that world belonging to the man and the sun. And in that form, belonging to man and the sun, he goes to this world belonging to the woman and to fire. Eighth Kanda. Here, with regard to obtaining Hiranyagarbha, there are these slokas. The fivefold body into which the indestructible prana breath enters, that body which the harnessed horses, the senses, draw about, That body where the true of the true, the highest Brahman, follows after, in that body of the worshipper all gods become one. That body into which goes the indestructible, the breath, which we have joined in meditation, proceeding from the indestructible, the highest Brahman, that body which the harnessed horses, the senses draw about, that body where the true of the true follows after, in that body all gods become one. After separating themselves from the yes and no of language, and of all that is hard and cruel, poets have discovered what they sought for. Dependent on names, they rejoiced in what had been revealed. That in which the poets rejoiced, the revealed nature of prana, breath, in it the gods exist, all joined together. Having driven away evil by means of that Brahman which is hidden in prana, the enlightened man goes to the Swarga world, becomes one with Hiranyagarbha, the universal spirit. No one wishing to describe him, prana, breath, by speech, describes him by calling him woman, neither woman nor man, or man, all such names applying only to the material body and not to prana or breath. Brahman, as hidden beneath prana, is called the A, and the I, ego, is gone there. The worshipper should know that he is Ukta and prana. This becomes perfect as 1,000 of Brihati verses, and of that hymn, perfect with 1,000 Brihati verses, there are 36,000 syllables. So many are also the thousands of days of human life. By means of the syllable of life, the A alone, which is contained in that 1,000 of hymns, does a man obtain the day of life, the Mahavrata day, which completes the number of the days in the Gavamanya sacrifice, and by means of the day of life he obtains the syllable of life. Now there is a chariot of the god, prana, destroying all desires, for the worlds of Indra, the moon, the earth, all of which lie below the place of Hiranyagarbha. Its front part, the point of the two shafts of the carriage where the yoke is fastened, is speech, its wheels the ears, the horses the eyes, the driver the mind. Prana, breath, mounts that chariot, and on it, that is, by means of meditating on prana, he reaches Hiranyagarbha. This has been said by a Rishi: "Come hither on that which is quicker than mind, and come hither on that which is quicker than the twinkling of an eye, yea, the twinkling of an eye." End of first, second and third Adhyayas of second Aranyaka. Recording by Jyoti Taravanat.